Before we get to that, I just want to talk about some of these news polls that we've seen in the last 48 hours. Let's kick off with the federal news poll, which showed that Scott Morrison had these near record figures. We're talking about figures that were only reached by Kevin Rudd during 2009. Now, he's flying. My question to you tonight is, you've been in opposition as a Chief of Staff and you've also been in government as a Chief of Staff. How does Anthony Albanese catch up, if you like, over the next couple of years with his oxygen basically being taken away during this particular crisis?
I think he's got to be careful not to push too hard. I think why people are willing Australia and Team Australia's captain is the Prime Minister to succeed here. I think it's really important for Labor that they don't look like they're playing politics or looking to find mileage on sort of tangential issues. Australians want the politics out of this at the moment. You don't see a lot of politics in the Prime Minister's presentation. Sure, there is a lot of politics, but I mean, he's reaching out to the premiers regardless of their political brand. He's very conscious of bringing people with him. He's not thumping the table and saying, well, as Liberals, we don't do this, or as, Labor should be doing that. It's all about what is required to get everyone through this health and now looming economic crisis. So I think Labor's best advice would be to put their head down and step away a little bit from this and do the work required to revisit some of these policies. I mean, it's only now 12 months ago, basically, we went into an election campaign. A lot of policies that they took to the election have been roundly criticised and rejected by the Australian people. Now, every time people say to Anthony Albanese, what's your position on negative gearing? Where are you up to with franking credits? What's your new position in relation to emissions reduction? And he says, oh, well, we're working on it. Well, use this time to work on it. We should be expecting him, Gleeson, as media commentators, to come out of this period where there hasn't been the politics in the parliament as usual, to have done the hard yards so that at the next election he's got something that's a bit more detailed than one uncosted policy after another.
Let's get to the state and territory leaders. Now, we've got a graphic and we'll put that up. And as you can see there, Mark McGowan from Perth, I've never seen figures like that. I mean, he's more popular than Santa Claus, this bloke. But the one I'm really interested in at the moment, Peter, is the Palaszczuk figure, the Queensland Premier figure. It is significantly lower. I mean, it's still pretty good, but when you consider the dramas that the Palaszczuk government is having in Queensland, you can understand why it's a lot lower than the others. Do you think that gives the LNP hope leading into the October 31 election, or do you think that figure, the Labor Party will take that every day of the week?
Well, I tell you what, if I was running an election campaign for a Premier going into her third election, she's won two, one accidentally, one very strongly, but she's going to a third election, I'd be banking and very happy with any approval number with a 50 percentile sort of number. Now, I know in net terms it comes off, absolutely it comes off in net terms, but everyone's comes off in net terms. I think there is a risk of complacency with oppositions generally, but in this case the LNP, that they think going for an historic third term would make her basically unelectable. They don't have to do much to knock her off. Well, I think that's wrong. I think that's very wrong. I think that's the trap Labor got into with Scott Morrison. And yes, she's got led in a saddlebag in relation to the economic performance of Queensland, Jackie Trad and others, but she has a cut-through against someone like Deb Frecklington, whom I quite like. But if you had to say to people in Queensland, what does the LNP stand for? Tell me in two, 3 words. Or what do you think of Deb Frecklington? Put some language around her. Who is she? Touch and feel her. What does she stand for? Really hard to nail that. Really hard to nail that. So Palaszczuk is not silly. She's cuddling up at every opportunity to Scott Morrison. She knows that she has to win people in the middle to win in October. She says lots of complimentary things about the Prime Minister. And I think, like WA, she's playing the parochial card about shutting the borders. She's out there congratulating Queenslanders at every opportunity. I mean, how wonderful we are. All of that's designed to help her electorally, if nothing else.
And you mentioned the LNP and its inability to get traction, particularly at the moment, and they're in a bit of froth and bubble again tonight. Now, Trevor Watts, the member for Toowoomba North, has informed his leader that he was fined today for breaching the coronavirus restrictions relating to a gathering that occurred on Saturday. Now, he's been sacked, he's been replaced, He's been replaced by a bloke called Dan. Where are we? Dan. He's been replaced. I'll get to that in a second. But basically, this is not a good look for the LNP right now.
Well, good on Deb Frecklington, though, for demanding his resignation and getting it. I mean, you saw what happened with Don Harwin and others. You see what happens almost every given day in other states and territories where there's quite egregious breaches of ministerial responsibility. I have to say I've been very critical of Brad Hazzard, the Health Minister in Queensland, over Ruby Princess. I was critical of David Elliott, the Police and Emergency Services Minister, who went away in the middle of the bushfire crisis on a trip to Europe. There's such little regard for ministerial responsibility. These guys are the opposition, but she's still demanding that they play the dignified game, and I think good on Deb Frecklington. I guess the challenge for her, again, is what do you stand for? What do your members stand for, your MPs on the front line? What's your message to Queenslanders? And they may not be in love with the Palaszczuk government, but unless you're offering something better, at times like this when people have anxious lives, they're worried about the future, you would expect there's a significant economic downturn coming. The risk is they stay with the incumbent, and that means an historic third term for Anastasia Palaszczuk, the first woman in Australia to lead a government or a party that ends up winning 3 elections on the trot. That's where it's headed if they don't start to cut through.
Dan Purdy is the fellow who will replace Trevor Watts. Now, he's the member for Nindri, and he now becomes the Shadow Minister for Police and Counter-Terrorism. Peter, the Chinese have become quite hairy-chested about calls throughout the globe for a proper investigation into exactly how this coronavirus was able to be transmitted from Wuhan. Now, they've even been talking about trade blockades. They've been talking about not cooperating, the WHO obviously complicit. Do you think Australia should stand up right now to the Chinese and say, no more wet markets, we want this particular problem solved, or do we, as usual, capitulate?
Well, I know what we should do. We should absolutely stand firm. We should take away the money to the World Health Organisation, and we should refuse to participate in any senior bodies, world bodies that China might be chairing at the moment. Oftentimes the chairing and membership of these bodies rotates, but if there's anything that China has the lead on now, the world, not just Australia, should be taking a stand, Gleeson. I don't think this is the time to roll over because of the dollar signs in our eyes. It's half the bloody reason we're in the trouble we are in. You know, the whole push, and I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago in my newspaper column, any time we used to stand up to China inside the government, and I'm sure this happened on Labor's side of the fence as much as the coalition, the number of very senior business people that would ring and speak to me, too scared to speak to the boss, but give me a blast about any comments the Prime Minister might have made quite reasonably, standing up for Australia's sovereignty over a particular cultural or military push of China, might have hurt their commercial interests, their marketing interests, or their financial interests, and they, want to bleat and moan to the government. Now, this is not Team Australia if our business people are craving about the dollar, but we as Australians more broadly need leaders who are circumspect about China's long-term objectives, are circumspect about where China has as its end game with buying things in Australia, sending students into Australia, and the bully boy tactics we've seen from the Chinese ambassador should tell us we should do more of what we're doing, not less.
Well, before we go, have you downloaded the tracing app? Are you surprised at the huge uptake? 2.44 million is the latest count on those that have downloaded the app. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely will sign up to the app. I have no issue with the app at all. The stuff that's on my phone is only on my phone for 21 days. It disappears. It doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't tell them anything about me. It doesn't tell me anything about the people my phone might have interacted. But should someone I've interacted with have the app and test positive, hopefully they'll release information to keep me and those around me safe that I love, like my mum, who had been in a lot of trouble as she got coronavirus. And similarly, I would be able to help someone who has come into contact with me over a period of time if I release the information to the health authorities. I tell you what, there's more about any of us on a 1 or 2 day Google search of things we might be looking to buy or places we might want to go and visit or what we've got on our Facebook page than there is on this app. And I think we all should just harden up and download the app and get out of this lockdown as quick as we can.
Yeah, I get plenty of Ladbrokes and Bet365s, as you can imagine, Peta Credlin.
Can I tell you a story just quickly? My mum was looking for something for I think it was a bedspread or something like that, and she got online and looked for it, and then she kept saying to me, why on earth am I getting all of these ads about bedspreads? I said, Mum, it's because you went Googling for it. Anyway, there you go. She will be getting the app, I promise you.
I'm sure she will. Great to see you tonight, Peter.